Well, I try to look at a business opportunity from several different perspectives. I learned something years ago at MIT Media Lab from Marvin Minsky, known as the father of artificial intelligence at that time, that you don't really understand something unless you understand it more than one way. And so I've got now a pretty good domain expertise in financial services. So every day I read the Financial Times. I'm looking for things that are going on in terms of what's happening in the emerging markets. How are banks adapting to the international crisis of the fact that international banks tend to be more sovereign banks and our banks in the U.S. tend to be more based on deposits? What is happening in terms of interest rates? What's happening in terms of big macro trends that may have bearing on the ability to borrow capital, the ability to borrow capital at attractive rates. So that's one view. And I also read the Wall Street Journal every day. In the Wall Street Journal, it's less of a global view, but it's much more of a business industry, business company view. And so I try to track a number of different industries. I track business-to-business industries in the enterprise space, but I also track consumer industries. I track what's going on in technology. Every morning I open up Business Insider, TechCrunch, and see what the latest stories are, because I want to know what are people in the technology community talking about. What I've learned over the years is that the best way for me to learn things, it's like peeling an onion, but doing it backwards. In other words, each layer of that onion skin is adding to the information base that I have. So now I have enough knowledge of technology, enough knowledge of financial systems, enough knowledge of various industry verticals that when I read something, I don't have to remember the entire article. I'm just reading to find, is there something different than what I knew about that before? So think of it as looking for the differences, not just looking for all of the information. Once you get enough knowledge in a particular domain, then you can start to look for the differences. What's different today than the last time I looked at this subject? You can only do that if you start to build up layer by layer knowledge, as opposed to trying to take a subject and start from scratch and absorb the entire subject and become an expert just by an accelerated, intensive investigation of that area. I much prefer to try to build up my knowledge base every day, sometimes adding just a little bit of information, but it's day in, day out, day in, day out. And so if you do that over a period of months, even years, it's amazing how much you start to really know about a subject. For example, I didn't get into healthcare until 8 years ago, but I've been thinking about healthcare every day for the last 8 years. And I still don't consider myself to be a domain expert in healthcare, but I have a lot more knowledge than most people I meet in healthcare. And then when I can combine that with the long experience I have, 30 years in high technology, and I've seen high technology in many different waves, from the personal computer era to the internet era to now the cloud and then the mobility era. And you start to see technology through many different contexts. And it's all about context that makes information useful. So then I look at consumer marketing, and I have a long history of having worked in all kinds of consumer products and building brands. So now if I look at my domain expertise in brand building, my domain expertise in high technology, my developing expertise in healthcare, when I look at healthcare, I look at it very differently than the people who've been in healthcare their entire life. I'll never know as much as they do, perhaps, but I'll know it from a different angle. And sometimes I'll get an insight that may have been overlooked by the professional healthcare expert just because their view is much narrower, because they haven't had the exposure to the high technology or the exposure to consumer branding. It's why when we started to explore the opportunities for what is healthcare missing, we saw that, gee, healthcare is not going to get solved in Washington. It's going to get solved in the home. That the consumers, the patients, are going to become much more involved in their own health, able to make decisions. They'll want freedom of choice services, and they'll be able to take more accountability, and there'll be more transparency in terms of what things cost. those types of observations open up, the opportunity to really think about business building differently.